Our collusion and corruption segment tonight. Democratic Senator Bob Menendez is on trial for corruption, but you won't hear that from the mainstream media. Liberal talking heads are trying to cover for the Democrats. Case in point here, the New York Times published a story about Menendez's trial, mentioning Menendez 29 separate times, but mentioning that he was a Democrat 0 times. Of course, when a Republican politician does something objectionable, the fact that they are a Republican, that is always plastered along the headline. But since the mainstream media won't tell you about this story, we will. With me now, retired Navy commander and former Pentagon spokesperson, J.D. Gordon. J.D., good to see you.
Hey, Liz, great to see you too.
All right, J.D., this seems to me like it's a pretty bombshell story. This should be something that's plastered along every headline. It should be something headlining every newsroom. For the first time in 36 years, a sitting U.S. senator is on trial for felony corruption and bribery. That's quite something.
You know, this is a once-in-a-generation scandal, I think, in the Senate for the level of corruption that Senator Menendez is charged with. And it's something that I like to talk about personally because I grew up at the Jersey Shore. So when you talk about corruption in New Jersey, that's something that I've heard growing up. But seeing something that Senator Menendez is alleged to have done is really off the charts as far as corruption goes.
Right. I mean, he's facing 12 charges here of bribery and corruption. It all stems from his interactions with a rich donor who he apparently received gifts, travel, money. I mean, there's even allegations that he went to South America for some sort of sex and prostitution parties in exchange for giving this donor favors. This donor was later convicted of Medicare and Medicaid fraud. It's a pretty huge level of corruption in the United States Senate.
It really is. The donor is Dr. Salomon Melgen, and he's basically a South Florida-based Dominican Republic guy. He's from the Dominican Republic originally, and he would take Senator Menendez on these trips to the Dominican Republic, and they'd engage in what I would call sketchy behavior, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Salomon Melgen was convicted in the biggest Medicare scandal ever in the history of the United States, and that's his buddy. And also Senator Menendez was doing things like getting visas for Melgen's girlfriends to come from the Dominican Republic. It's just so beyond what's expected for a U.S. senator. Even to take any of those flights, I mean, is off the charts corrupt, but it didn't really stop Menendez. And shame on the New York Times for not even saying that he's a Democrat. In a 1,300-word story, the hypocrisy is beyond the pale, you know, because every time they mention someone who's attacking Trump who's a Democrat, things the Democrats like to talk about, like Adam Schiff or Eric Swalwell, Maxine Waters, Jackie Speier, all Democrats from California. They're from pretty far left districts, so they love to attack Trump. Well, every time you see their name in the paper, in the mainstream media outlets, it's D, California, D, right. Democrat attacking Trump. But as soon as a Democrat does something wrong, well, they don't even mention it.
Well, that's the thing. This is, the way that the mainstream media is handling this coverage just exposes what they really are, and they're a brand management firm for the Democratic Party here. They're only interested in helping further the brand of the Democrats. They're not interested in honesty here. They're not interested in exposing corruption. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me that the same media who has focused relentlessly on accusations against Donald Trump and everyone who's ever been associated in any capacity with Donald Trump, and I don't need to tell you about this, JD, that they have focused relentlessly on those stories with no substantiation, that they've been obsessed with corruption and collusion that is unprovable, that when we actually have a real case of corruption and collusion, they don't even care about it. They do 1 or 2 cursory articles, and then it's a move along, please. We have something about Trump we'd rather criticize.
Well, Liz, you're absolutely right. I'm glad we're talking about it on OAN because a lot of networks aren't even talking about it in that vein, in that way. So I think it's really important that we're bringing light to this. I think a lot of media suffer from TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. They're just so apoplectic and mad at him and any associates that nothing's really too good to pass on. I mean, to pass up. They just have this salacious speculation constantly. But when you get an actual case of real corruption, real bona fide corruption with Senator Menendez, the New York Times doesn't even identify him as a Democrat. I mean, how crazy is that?
Right, and this story is so complicated, so corrupt, so outrageous that it could be, it could be the plot of a movie, realistically, rather than actually something you read in the news. That's the kind of stuff people like to read about. Shame on the mainstream media for not covering this. JD, this is an opportunity for Democrats to come out and actually say, listen, our witch hunt against President Trump is because we actually care about corruption, and this is our chance to prove it. Democrats could say they could prove it by going after one of their own for actual corruption, and they don't do that. And the reason, JD, I think they don't do that is because they're scared. They don't care so much about about law-breaking activity. They don't care so much about honesty and integrity and ethics when they're representing the American people as they do about their votes. If they lose Senator Menendez in the Senate, they could lose that one critical vote that they need to protect President Obama's precious legacy, Obamacare. If they lose him, that all might be gone. And they'd rather choose that, President Obama's legacy, than their duty and responsibility to the American people.
Well, you're right, Liz. I mean, they're basically like, nothing to see here, folks, move along, probably trumped up charges. The Democrats are definitely circling the wagons for Menendez, because if he's found guilty, and his trial will last probably a couple months, if he's found guilty, he'll most likely, I'm sure, have to resign from the Senate. And then Governor Christie, who's still in office until January, will get a chance to appoint someone. He'll appoint a Republican. So that'll shift the balance of power in favor more to the Republicans. And it's a very razor slim majority, 52 to 48. So if the Republicans pick up another seat, that's going to be very good to advance the agenda that we're trying to get in the United States, that is Republicans. Right,
but that's the other thing. It just shows how cowardly Democrats are, because they're just trying to keep their mouths closed and wait silently until January. Hope that this story, this trial isn't completed, that there's no conviction charges, or I guess opposite, before January, because if they don't have to comment on this until that point, it won't be a Republican governor in New Jersey. And if Menendez is forced to resign, that's the point that they can push him to the wayside, because they'll just get a fresh new Democrat. But this is the chance. We, the American people, should ask each and every one of us who has a Democratic senator as our senator, we should ask them, get them on the record condemning Menendez, because if he's convicted and he refuses to resign, it's then up to the senators, our senators, every one of them, to expel him from the Senate. And if Democratic senators refuse to do that for a vote, we, the American people, need to know, because that shows where their priorities are.